Hey everyone. So welcome to the US-based Harper community meeting. So let me share my screen real quick. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
So today I'm going to talk about one of the things that we're working on for the upcoming release, which is the proxy cache. So this is the ability for Harbor to act as a pull-through cache for another registry. So the background is, imagine you have a bunch of Docker nodes that are trying to access images on a registry somewhere, but they have no connectivity to it, or they have little connectivity to it because of compliance or limited egress options, etc. Right? So for any number of reasons, really. But if you have Harbor deployed, you can use Harbor as a middleman to pull those images down from that. We can call that registry you're trying to access the remote registry. So Harbor can pull those down from the remote registry, store it in its cache, and then serve those to the clients locally now. So you minimize network traversals, free up bandwidth, and you solve that connectivity issue. So, we've heard these requirements a lot from open source users as well as people internally in the company. If you pull excessively from Docker Hub will throttle you, or IP ban sometimes even for private deployments where you fairly locked down environment or air gap or something like that. You can use the proxy cache to let you gain access to those images, but without violating the security policies put in place, right? So we mapped out some of the user stories here. So I think it'd be useful for us to just go through it. They're not finalized, so you can see here that it's targeted for the 2.1 release. We're in the final week of 2.0, so 2.1 officially starts next week. So now would be a good time to, if you have any questions or comments, just go on the ticket and add them here, discussions. So I'll briefly go through some of the stories we've mapped out for this feature. So the way we imagine delivering this feature is through what's known as a proxy project. So here we know it's parallel to a Harbor project, which means that's very similar to a Harbor project, but a few distinctions, right? So if you're trying to access a remote repository, imagine configuring a proxy project in Harbor for that remote repository. So you configure the endpoint, the credentials, create an alias for that proxy project, etc. And so you've now set up a one-on-one mapping between your Harbor proxy cache and your remote repository. And we want to be able to deliver, setting up for multiple target repositories, whether they're on the same instance or on different target registries. So I can have a proxy cache for Harbor, for another Harbor. I can have a proxy cache for GCR, one for ACR, etc. Right? So multiple target repositories per Harbor instance is the goal here. Full RBAC. So one of the distinctions between this proxy project and a regular project is the proxy project is going to be read-only. So the second one and third one, or second one ties into the third one. The proxy project is going to be pull-only. From the only interaction between the client and the proxy is the client can pull from the proxy. Right? So you can't manually push to the proxy anyway. The way the proxy gets populated is via an internal mechanism where it pulls down images from the remote repository. But for the Docker nodes, there's no pushing to it. And there's full role-based access permissions, or role-based, full RBAC. You can configure the cache as as public or private. Image pool commands and pod specs. So one of the things that we want to make sure we deliver with this feature is we don't want to inconvenience the user to have to modify his pod spec. Right? So where you have the image path in your Kubernetes deployment YAML, there should be no modification needed. And the harbor proxy will take care of translating that. So if you're trying to hit gcr.io library busybox, right? Through the use of a mutating webhook or something else, it should automatically intercept that request and reroute it to the proxy cache that's been set up for it. And if you specify the proxy project in the pod spec to begin with, then it'll pull directly from the proxy. So, so the image pool flowchart, this is detailing some of the scenarios around pulling from the proxy cache. So the first one is fairly easy, right? It's when you're pulling an image from the proxy the first time. The proxy is unpopulated to begin with, and so it will hit the upstream, pull it down, store it in the cache, and then serve it to the client. And every time before it serves the image to the client, it'll always check the upstream to see if there's a newer version. So you're pulling by tag, right? So it's possible that on the upstream, that tag now belongs to a different digest. So the proxy is responsible for always pulling the latest copy before serving to the client. And if there isn't a newer copy, then it just serves whatever is in the cache. So scenario 4 is, if it's in the cache, but it's been removed from the upstream, then it won't serve that request. So checking the upstream is one of the key steps, right? Because the assumption is that this proxy has been set up with the approval of the admin on the upstream. So everyone's is aware of a proxy cache being set up for that upstream repository for the clients. So if the image has been removed from the upstream registry, from the point of view of the harbor proxy cache, it means that it's not intended to be served to Docker clients. So the proxy cache will respect the wishes of the upstream and basically abort that pull request. But if the upstream is down, that's a different scenario altogether, because we treat that as a failure of the upstream. So the proxy cache will serve whatever is in the cache to the client, but without the ability to update itself to the latest version. So we also have the ability to set some retention policies on the proxy project. This is very similar to what we have right now with tag retention policies for a harbor project. But the difference being the retention policies on the proxy cache are constantly enforced. So it's not something that you run on a scheduled task basis. Right? It's not execution based. It's long running. It's always enforced. So during the creation of the proxy project, you can specify a retention time, which is how long the artifacts will live on the cache before it's removed. Or you can specify a policy like only retain the most recently pulled X artifacts, support -1 for infinite retention, etc. So this is, the format and the goal of this is very similar to what we have with tag retention right now. And finally, the stretch goal is, because you're always, we talked about, you're always going to be checking the upstream to make sure you serve the latest version of that tag. So, this is just allowing it to just do it in the background, right? Every time there's an update in the upstream, the proxy cache will silently update itself. So So it doesn't have to do that when there's an actual pull request. Complete logging of all pushes and pulls. It's very important because the proxy cache is now functioning as an intermediary to broker all the transactions between the client and the upstream. So it's important to log all the requests go into the proxy cache for bookkeeping purposes. In the future, we could look at that data and look at the amount of traffic that was reduced or consolidated as a result of having a proxy in the future. So those are the user stories we've mapped out for the hardware registry serving as a proxy cache. The exact implementations are a little murky right now, and so the feasibility of some of the things that are being described here are still being investigated. But this is by and large the experience that we want to deliver in the final product. So, any questions, comments?
I'm very excited about this one. This is actually something that I talked to Daniel Yang about last year when we were running an event over at KubeCon in Barcelona, and we wanted to have kind of a proxy cache or a registry mirror of some sort for an event over at KubeCon. We had a bunch of people pulling down images, and we wanted them to immediately point towards a local Harbor instance instead of going out and pulling down images from Docker Hub. So what I found was an old document, and it's still in the main repo. And this is not being used anymore, I was told. This was functionality that was pulled out a long time ago. I think it was very, very basic at the time. So I'm super happy to see this get a very thought out and well thought out implementation like this.
I think the document you're referring to is it's leveraging, so Docker distribution itself has that ability.
Mm-hmm.
It has the ability to configure like a remote URL. And because we consume Docker distribution, you can do that in Harbor essentially. And this feature, the implementation, I think we're still looking to leverage that, but with some minor changes to it. But the problem with that native ability of Docker distribution to act as a pull-through cache is it's limited to Docker Hub. It didn't open itself up to other third-party registries. There was a PR to get it merged, support for other registries, and then I think it's been 2 years and it still hasn't been merged. And then Containerd just went off and did it. So Containerd actually, you can use Containerd to proxy for multiple third-party registries, but I think Docker daemon, as of right now, it still only works for Docker Hub. But yeah, I mean, we've already worked out some of the details. So in the first user story, proxying from multiple target registries per Harbor instance is a key requirement. So I think in most cases, most users just are proxying for one. Most people are just trying to get this feature so they can proxy for Docker Hub. But in the future, we definitely see people trying to proxy for different instances, or not having to stand up a new Harbor to proxy for something else. Right? That's hugely inconvenient.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Okay. I wanted to mention that the 2.0 is up. So the 2.0 release, the official GA is next week on the 13th, but we'll basically have an FC tag under releases.
On that proxy cache feature, this is very similar to replication, but more on demand, right? Is that the idea?
It's very similar to replication, but on demand. Yeah, basically.
Very cool. So that would work for an intermittent connection too. So say you've got some instance of Harbor that doesn't have a very good internet connection, and it could act as a proxy to keep a local copy of files and update them when possible, failing more gracefully, right?
Yep.
Very cool.
So here's a 2.0 release. Try it out. It was a big release for us. For 4 months, 4.5 months in the making. Yep. And then we are looking at some of the things that we're trying to do for 2.1. So if you go to the Harbor project board, 2.1, product suggestions, swim lane. So these are some of the things that we're looking to deliver for 2.1 release. Questions, comments, please add them here. So, any questions, comments on the Proxy Cache or anything that we're doing for 2.1? So just briefly going through 2.1, we're online garbage collection is going to be part of the 2.1 payload for sure. Proxy Cache is definitely part of 2.1. We're working to deliver better P2P integration with Kraken, Uber Kraken, and Alibaba Dragonfly. So the theme here being better distribution of artifacts through Harbor, better, faster distribution of artifacts. And then some changes, minor changes to robot accounts. So that's all I have for today's agenda. Anything else anybody want to share or discuss? All right, and there's no questions. I think we can end here.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, thanks guys. Thanks everyone. Thanks for attending.
Have a good one. Bye.